I think we're starting up now. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another On the Contrary, the show that is unafraid to share the deepest, darkest NFL thoughts we have from the dark recesses of our mind. I said dark too many times there. I'm Chris Spags, joined, as always, by the top of the world, a lovely human being as well, Mr. Alex Baker, better known as Osmo. How are you doing, Alex?
I'm doing great. How about you guys?
Feeling good. And I'm introducing now another man who is currently, he's weathering us. He's a little under the weather, I think would be the best way to put it. But he's rallying for us because he cares. Senior editor at Roto World, one of the best minds in football, at Evan Silva on Twitter. Evan Silva, how you doing, Evan?
What's up, guys? I'm doing all right. Gonna power through here.
You're feeling fresh. It's Saturday morning. Look, like everybody's going to be watching this stream. We are human beings. And, if anything, Evan, it only makes it more relatable to be battling through a hangover, a vintage Michael Jordan style hangover to bring content to the. But before we get into the slate, we are going to give you guys our contrarian picks, some of which will be better than others. Might be a Mitch Trubisky, might be an Isaiah Crowell, hopefully somewhere amongst the mix. But we should talk about one thing, a little bit of controversy around the DFS/fantasy/football analysis community. The Air Yards founder, Josh Hersmeyer, I always fuck up his name. Hermsmeyer. He was talking this week about how defense, in his view, doesn't matter. He's pointed to some interesting little data points that seem to support his case. I want to talk to you guys about that because obviously you'll both have different perspectives on it. Alex, let's talk to you first. Do you think defense matters when you're approaching a slate and, the way that you attack things? Does it matter in your process?
I don't even take this guy seriously enough to even address this issue. I mean, that is just like the dumbest take, and I feel like he's just trolling everyone.
Wow. All right. I like him. I think he's been a smart guy for the most part, been very data aware. Obviously, the guy behind the Air Yards stat. So I think he does have some value. But it did seem like a bit of a hot take. I don't know, Evan, do you have an opinion? I think you know him a little more on a personal level too.
Yeah. I mean, I've had him on podcasts with Ross Tucker and I a couple of times. I really like him. I mean, he's a super, super smart guy. But this is something that he would say. I mean, he's definitely like, he's kind of like, he's like a little degaff, just with the way that he operates. And I mean, I like that about him. I think that some people kind of get like offended by the way that he like kind of operates, especially like in social media. But I think he's totally not like that in real life. I mean, he's like a data analyst, man. And, I think that there's definitely some truth to it. And really, we even talked about this a little bit earlier in the season. We didn't say that defenses don't matter, but what we talked about was, is it overrated? And is it, are we building it in too much? Are we, and we talked about, Alex specifically talked about like the, like fantasy points allowed by a certain position. And then you go back and look at, well, guess what? That's because they face Rob Gronkowski, Travis Kelce, and, Jared Cook in the first 3 weeks. Of course, they're going to give up more yards and fantasy points to tight ends because they just faced 3 of the most highly used tight ends in the NFL. I think that, the foundation for our expectations should always be volume in fantasy, especially at the running back, wide receiver, and tight end positions. We want pass catchers that are getting targets. We want running backs that are getting carries and targets. And then really to like maybe narrow our player pool, we use other data points like, who are they facing? We include other data points like, hey, do we think they're going to be low owned if we're building, tournament rosters? Do we think that they have a high floor if we're building a cash roster? We use all these other little data points to narrow our focus after we determine who we think is going to be getting the ball a lot, or who we think has a chance to make big plays. Because like Robbie Anderson last week, we probably knew that he wasn't going to get 11 targets, but we did know that he was probably going to get some air yards a lot of air yards or some big play chances. And so that put him on our radar. But we can't play, Robbie Anderson every week. We can't play every dude in the NFL. So we need ways to like narrow our focus. And I think that defense is one of the data points that we look at to help narrow our focus.
Yeah, and I think too, it's something that Alex has been helpful in teaching me since I've been on board with the team here earlier this year. But it's looking more at each thing as being a weight on the outcome likelihood of each thing happening. And a defense to me is just part of that equation. If you're going against a good defense, it means that it's more likely that you'll have tough sledding in the day. You could still get there. You could still, you could still be a nut play. You could still be amazing, but it's going to be tougher to get there. Whereas if you're going versus the worst defense, like Ezekiel Elliott getting 25 touches versus the Chiefs versus getting 25 touches versus the Jaguars like you'll have this week, you want an easier matchup because it increases the likelihood of a thing occurring. So Alex, I'll give you the credit there, but I guess any final word on this before we talk about the games, Alex?
I think it's just a case of hyperbole, and I think this guy, I think his name is Josh Hermsmeyer, right? I mean, he's clearly exaggerating his viewpoint to spark controversy and discussion. I think there's something to the idea, like Evan's saying, that it might not matter as much as some people might make it out to be. But if you want to be successful at fantasy, you got to take into account all of the factors. And I don't think it makes sense to disregard one factor in favor of other ones.
Yeah, there you go. And I think, he is a smart guy. Go check him out. I think he's at Frisco Josh on Twitter. Can be a little brusque on Twitter with when you question his stuff. But I think Josh Hermsmeyer, anybody contributing to the debate and thinking about things differently, I think is somebody we try to applaud on this show where we go outside the box. Before we dig into the slate, one thing you guys should be aware of, everybody who's in the chat, we're paying attention to you as well. But go check out our ownership projections and Awesemo's rankings on awesemo.com right now. Promo code CONTRARY, CONTRARY, will get you 1 week free. And again, we're talking about ownership projections a lot in the show, and it is very helpful when building your tournament teams. So go check that out now. Promo code CONTRARY on awesemo.com. Let's talk about the chalkiest slate or chalkiest game on the slate. It is going to be Tampa Bay heading into Atlanta. Jameis Winston, a lovely human being, getting the best possible return for himself versus the team he loves to play, has been historically great against, stepping into an offense, putting up a ton of yards, going against a very injured defense. Is there any reason at all to not like Jameis besides the various moral quandaries involved, Evan?
No, I mean, and his price is great, so I think that there's every reason to like him. I mean, just like everyone in this game, I mean, it's a massive total. It's 57, 58. I mean, I think it even goes over that, both defenses are terrible. I think it's going to be up in pace. I think that Tevin Coleman became very interesting as the week progressed, but my guess is that you guys probably have him as a super popular play at this point with no Devontae Freeman. But I mean, I think that there's merit to like pretty much everyone in this game. I guess the exception would be the running backs in Tampa Bay, and then the tight end situation in Tampa Bay is also kind of hard to sort out because O.J. Howard was full practice on Friday, and it looks like he's likely to play, but he practiced in a bulky knee brace all week. So, what are we doing with Cameron Brate? I mean, he's minimum price on FanDuel. I think he's really cheap on DraftKings as well. But yeah, I mean, everything to like about this game, like almost every player.
You mentioned Tevin Coleman's ownership real fast. He is currently projected for about 10% in our ownership projections on awesemo.com. So not as high as you might think, but I think he's an appealing option. And I'm not as afraid of the Tampa Bay backfield as you might be, Evan. I think it's not good, but I think somebody there has to do something. And with both Barber and Jones projected for under 5%, actually under 3% ownership, I do think it's an interesting little leverage spot to go to in this matchup. What are you doing with this game, Alex?
I think this is going to be a big game for fantasy, but I'm not as keen on it as the field, I suppose, because in our ownership projections, it looks like it's going to be by far the most popular game. I still think that players in this game are like good picks, like Mike Evans, Julio Jones. I mean, the team sacks could go off, one guy I'm not as high on is Cameron Brate. I'm kind of surprised everyone's on him because so far this year he hasn't been doing very much. Maybe now that Howard is he's probable for the game, Brate will see a lower workload. I think it's all based on this idea that Jameis Winston will target him more than Ryan Fitzpatrick. And I'm not really sure that's something you can trust, because I feel like a lot of that is probably scheme and the team's kind of offensive plans for the year, and not like who's quarterbacking. A lot of tight ends this year, or people of any position, they just have seen a lot less targets per route. Cameron Brate hasn't been seeing a ton of targets, so I don't expect any reason for that to change.
Yeah, Brate is going to be a popular play, probably a little less popular now that OJ Howard is practicing. I think he actually practiced in full yesterday. So he should at least be out there. He's questionable right now, but it seems like he's trending towards playing. I think the hope for Brate, and it was actually in Evan's matchup column, I saw that when Jameis was in week 4, that Brate was tied for third in the team with targets. Surprisingly, Adam Humphries was Winston's most targeted guy down the stretch of when he filled in for Ryan Fitzpatrick a couple weeks ago. I like Brate. I think he's in a good spot. I think I like him more if Howard's going to play. I think it makes him more of a viable GPP play. I don't know, Evan, what do you think about the Brate Winston situation?
In terms of just, well, I mean, that first of all, that was a super small sample size. I mean, so we can't really have, takeaways from, but I agree with you that the Adam Humphries thing was kind of interesting. I mean, this dude's going to come out and have 9 catches and just troll us all against Atlanta. But, that connection between like how people, draw the line from Winston to Brate and then Fitzpatrick to like OJ Howard or Fitzpatrick away from Cameron Brate. I mean, there have actually definitely been times where Ryan Fitzpatrick did target Cameron Brate a lot. I remember there was a game last year where I think Winston got hurt early in the game and Fitzpatrick came in and was throwing like crazy to Cameron Brate. I think he had like 2 touchdowns. So I'm skeptical of that, but I would say that, the reason that we would like Cameron Brate is because he's cheap. He's playing in this game. He has a pretty good red zone history. He's been a touchdown scorer for sure in the NFL. And he might get a bump in usage if OJ Howard is limited or out. But now it looks like OJ Howard is going to play. I mean, it's not an easy situation to forecast because there's a lot of uncertainty. We've seen games where Cameron Brate is just completely non-existent, and I don't know what to say. Like, he's cheap, you know what you're getting into. You kind of probably need a touchdown for him to really pay off because he's probably not going to have 7 catches for 80 yards. That's not what Cameron Brate does. So, you know what you're getting into, man. You're taking a cheap dart, and you probably don't have a lot of upside, and you probably really need a touchdown for him to be a useful fantasy play.
Yeah, I think this week of all weeks, I think it makes a little more sense to play him where there isn't kind of a Zach Ertz type guy who is going to give you 10 targets and a certain floor. I don't mind the play, and I'll probably have a bit of him, and I think, again, it's a little better with OJ Howard in as a GPP play. But I agree, over-relying on Cameron Brate this week, now that we know OJ Howard is probably going to play, it's a bit of a mess. Alex, if you had to play one wide receiver, Dapiana23 is asking, with Jameis Winston, which wide receiver would you play?
I mean, Mike Evans definitely, he sees the most targets on the team, so I think that is the highest correlation probably. So if I was game stacking, I'd probably go that way. But to be honest, there's just other games that I prefer, and especially with the ownership, I'm having some trouble getting to these guys compared to some of the other games.
So let's talk about the chalkiest player on the slate right now, projected. Julio Jones, currently expected to be owned at around 40% ownership. So I assume he fits the criteria of guys that you are avoiding this week, Alex?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, with Jones, obviously any week he could break the slate. But the main thing I'm thinking with him, he just like doesn't see as much. He doesn't get as many touchdowns. I think it's pretty clear at this point compared to other players of his tier.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're comparing him to Antonio Brown and DeAndre Hopkins, I feel like he's a little bit less desirable to put in your lineup. So especially with him having ownership that high, I feel like he could have another performance where he does pretty well, gets yards and catches, but doesn't see the end zone. And I think that there's a pretty good chance that Brown and Hopkins will outscore him.
Okay, I still like Julio, and I for the slate breaking reasons, I think I wish his ownership were down a little bit, and I am afraid of being on the outside looking in with Julio if people are going to own him at 40% and he does put up a vintage game. He has historically killed Tampa Bay. Obviously, we've talked about. I mean, Tampa Bay is giving up 446 yards per game. Everything 9.1 yards per pass. Everything is really looking in favor of Julio. So I'll probably be with the field on him, but I get that logic. One thing to point out too, Calvin Ridley projected for just under 10% ownership. He'd be the lowest owned part of this, pretty much this game besides the Tampa Bay running back. So maybe some leverage there if he gets back to his touchdown form. Alex, what game are you looking at instead of Tampa Bay Atlanta then, and to differentiate your lineups?
Well, one team I always like to see, the teams that haven't been putting out the big numbers because I feel like they're going under the radar. So I'm going back to Russell Wilson, I think, versus Oakland. Recently, they've just been running the ball a ton, but I don't think that's sustainable. So what I might play for is the possibility that they have to pass. It's going to be like more of a shootout kind of game. And I really like some of the receivers on the team. Nick Vannett, with Will Dissly out, I think that it hasn't materialized yet, but there's a potential he's going to see a lot of targets. Doug Baldwin and Tyler Lockett are both cheap. Of course, Doug Baldwin kind of put up a stinker last week, so I think that's going to make people a little hesitant to go back to him because he's pretty chalky. And I think you can run it back with Amari Cooper or Jared Cook, and it's kind of like a sneakier game to target.
Yeah, I think that makes sense too, given the ownership expected on Chris Carson. He's currently projected to be one of our highest owned running backs. Evan, what do you think about this matchup, Seattle and Oakland, taking place in London? So that also a bit of a wrinkle in things, but how do you view it overall, Evan?
Definitely like targeting offensive players against the Raiders because they do not rush the passer. They have probably the weakest pass rush in the NFL, either them or the Giants. And they have major problems in their secondary. I mean, every week they're benching someone. They've benched they had first-round picks in 2016 and 2017. One was a safety. Last year was a cornerback, Gary Conley. They've benched both of those dudes. And they're using like all these old guys back there, like washed dudes like Leon Hall and Dominic Rodgers-Cromartie and Reggie Nelson. Like this is what John Gruden does. He loves playing with like old dudes, and they're slow. Like they are slow. So the Raiders give up a ton of big plays because they can't rush the passer. They can't limit the time to throw for the opposing quarterback. Receivers are getting open deep, and they're just getting smashed. And Russell Wilson has like been consistently one of the best deep ball throwers in the NFL really since he came into the league. He's not running, which sucks. I mean, he had 0 rushing attempts last game, and he wasn't running before that either. But he's a great deep ball thrower. Tyler Lockett has been crushing so far. I mean, he's got 3 plays of over 40 yards in 5 games, and that's not including a 39-yard touchdown that he caught last week against Marcus Peters. Just dusted Marcus Peters. So, I think that like the matchup is really, really hot for the Seahawks passing game and certainly for the running game as well. It sounds like Chris Carson is going to be super high owned. I didn't anticipate that, but it does make sense. I mean, people are kind of getting smarter, I think, in DFS. Like, it's, people used to just play like the players that they're most familiar with, but now everyone knows who Chris Carson is. And, I guess they're going to play him. So, but yeah, I mean, I really like the matchup, like from every angle for the Seahawks. And then Doug Baldwin, it was difficult last week because Russell Wilson had 13 completions. He only had 13 completions. So nobody is really going to have a good game in the passing game when a quarterback is completing 13 balls in 4 quarters. And it's kind of like fortunate that Tyler Lockett did. That's because he ripped a big play. So we're probably going to get a lot more than 13 completions in this game. And so Doug Baldwin should be able to pop back up.
Yeah, do you think there's anything wrong with Doug Baldwin health-wise after he was out? Because, I watched enough of this game where I felt like he wasn't getting the spacing, especially compared to Lockett, who is a younger player and does, get downfield. But anything you're seeing with that at all, Evan?
Yeah, I mean, it can be a tough thing to gauge, especially when a guy isn't getting the ball. We weren't even seeing him with the ball in his hands. I mean, you watched him the game before, it was just kind of like an average game, but it wasn't like concerning. We had 7 targets, 5 catches for, 60 yards or something. That's like not surprising that he would have a game like that. What is surprising is that he would have a game like last week. One thing I did notice is that he is playing outside more. He's not playing as much in the slot. And Tyler Lockett, and he's always been like a super high percentage slot receiver. And Tyler Lockett actually played in the slot more than Doug Baldwin last week. So, are they messing around with it? You have to understand, like, there's a new coaching staff, and we haven't seen Doug Baldwin under this new coaching staff very much. Are they going to mess with them? Are they not going to use them, like the old coaching staffs of past, or it's the offensive staff? They have a new offensive coordinator, Brian Schottenheimer. So there is definitely some uncertainty there, but that's why people are not going to play him. We know he's awesome. Well, at least when he's healthy, he's awesome. We know he's got a good matchup. We know his quarterback is awesome. So that there you have it.
Yeah, according to our ownership projections, Lockett is expected for about 4% ownership, Baldwin closer to 9%. So to me, like, I'm a little more comfortable playing Lockett just because I think I've seen more from him and I trust him a little more. And honestly, with Brian Schottenheimer, he's not the most inventive coordinator, at least in my view. And if Baldwin can't create separation, I don't find that there's going to be a way that Schottenheimer gives him the space to make it work better. So I'm a little more comfortable with Lockett, but I think the logic's there. And I'm with you, Alex, too, that this game could be a sneaky shootout. I worry a little bit about the jet lag thing, but I think on both sides, a lot of good plays. One guy we didn't mention, I think Marshawn Lynch, I think is in a pretty good spot. Coming down off of a bad week versus the Chargers last week. He's been getting a ton of touches. He's been a very important part of that offense. And Seattle versus the run, not the best. Let's talk about Todd Gurley. And this is more of an Alex question up front. He's the first guy to break $10,000, that barrier on DraftKings this season. He is still, obviously a very great player, but way higher price than everybody else on the slate. What are you doing with him, Alex?
Well, he's another guy that no matter what, he has the potential to break a slate. But that $10,000 price tag is really going to scare me off. I think I prefer him on FanDuel where he's $9,500. So that represents a much lower percentage of the cap. Yeah, but with DFS, it's all about finding like good value. So when he's 10K, if you project him for like 25 points or something, like or even up to 30, I mean, there's a pretty good chance he's going to disappoint. So I just prefer going to some other guys. I prefer the wide receivers this week. Like I mentioned, Brown and Hopkins, they're a bit cheaper, and I think they have kind of equal potential to crush it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Evan, what do you think about this game with some weather concerns, the Rams in Denver? Anything? How does the snow affect how you would perceive a game like this?
No, but the cold temperatures might. If it's supposed to be like 20, that's a concern. Especially like for Jared Goff, he played college ball at Cal. He has played in the NFL with the LA Rams, so the dude has not been like subject to cold weather a whole lot in his, football playing career. So that's something to think about. I don't know if I would necessarily make sweeping changes. I mean, let's look at the total. Has the total moved at all? Not really. Yeah,
it's still pretty high up there.
Yeah, it opened at 53. I mean, it's down a little bit, like 52, 51.5. It's like the third highest total on the slate. If I wake up Sunday morning and the total's down to like 47 or something, then I might start to get a little concerned. But I think that right now I still feel pretty confident about it. The place to attack the Broncos really and consistently has been at perimeter wide receiver or at the perimeter cornerbacks, because Bradley Roby he's been terrible. And the other cornerback position has been manned by like Adam Pac-Man Jones or Tremaine Brock. These dudes keep getting hurt. They're old. They're journeymen. We saw Robbie Anderson just go off against them. Robbie Anderson didn't do anything for a month and then just goes off against them. And the guys who play on the outside the most for the Rams are, of course, Brandin Cooks and Robert Woods. Looks like these guys are going to be fine off their concussions. They made it through the protocol. That's kind of the first place that I would look. In terms of Todd Gurley, it seems like, well, I don't know. What's your ownership percent projection for him?
He's at about 15% ownership right now on DraftKings.
All right, so he's still going to have decent ownership, even though, I mean, every show that I've like seen or been on or listened to this week was saying like, I can't really play Todd Gurley, so I thought he might be a little bit lower than that. But it is an opportunity to get him at relatively reduced ownership, but then you're going to have to really hit your cheaper picks. But I mean, that's the way that I'm kind of viewing the Rams side here. Some concern on golf regarding the weather. The snow doesn't matter. It's not going to be windy. But if it's really cold, that could be a concern. But then I like the outside receivers, Robert Woods and Brandin Cooks, and then Gurley he's really expensive, but he could score more points than any player on the slate. I mean, the Broncos have gotten their butt kicked in run defense in back-to-back games now. And Spags had that ridiculous Isaiah Crowell take last week.
Felt good. Felt good.
Yeah, good, man. Pat yourself on the back for that. That was awesome. You like the Jets D2? They were good, but it could have been so much better.
I know, it was close. They were almost the nut defense, but the Bengals ruined everything, I think, too.
Yeah. But they had like 4 sacks. I mean, that was a great combination there. It was unbelievable. So great call. But I think that Todd Gurley could score more points than anybody on the slate. So I think he should definitely be like he's going to definitely be in my player pool.
Alex, what do you think about the Denver offense? Because this to me seems like a spot where you might want to run some guys back, and it didn't work out totally well for Russell Wilson last week, but the Seattle offense did put up some points with the Rams on the road. I'm curious. It seems to me like a spot where Denver could be useful. Case Keenum has looked so bad, and it worries me, and he's not even finding his guys well enough. I mean, Thomas had his first good game in a while last week, but I feel like he's not getting Sanders the ball enough either. Alex, would you play Denver in this matchup? I mean, where it seems like they're going to need to make up some points?
Their team total is 22.5, which is one of the lower ones on the slate. So that's kind of a factor that makes me less inclined to stack up their offense. But if I did pick, if I'm on any player in the game for Denver, I'd probably pick Phillip Lindsay. I think the running back situation is a little bit crowded there, but he's been the best performer so far. And I think he has a pretty good price tag of $4,500 on DraftKings. So I think he's playable.
I think if the weather turns poor, I would be a little more interested in Royce Freeman. I don't know. He seems like one of those traditional backs that I'm used to that I think, a generation before us grew up with too, where he could tote the rock in the snow and they would just give it to him. That might just be me being biased again, but I like Freeman a little bit more in the matchup just because I see him being that kind of grinder running back that I could see Denver wanting to rely on in this matchup. But yeah, I don't know. Case Keenum, if it's the snow's not that bad, you can talk me into a little bit of him if you're doing a bunch of lineups. Stack Keenum with some of the wide receivers and hope maybe they get something going. And Lindsey too, pretty solid pass catching back. Alex, any other games that you're viewing as viable that we haven't talked about thus far?
I'm kind of intrigued by this Houston versus Buffalo game. I mean, Buffalo is
only person on the planet intrigued by this game.
Well, Buffalo obviously is one of they're the consensus 32nd best team in the league. In the NFL, that means they're still pretty good, I think. But the reason I'm intrigued is because the prices are fair. Hopkins at 7,700, Watson at 6,400. And one sleeper pick I'm kind of looking at this week is for Buffalo, Kelvin Benjamin. I mean, he has been terrible this year so far. He's averaged about 5 fantasy points a game, it looks like. But he's been getting the targets. He had 5, 6, 5, 3, 7 on average. I expect each of those targets to be worth about a couple points, despite his poor performance so far this year. So I think with the prices, it's viable to kind of hope for an outlier performance from the Bills' offense, and that would be huge for Houston's offense.
Are you not seeing that quite as much, Evan?
No, I mean, well, like, okay, so how much is Kelvin Benjamin? How much does he cost?
3,400 on DraftKings.
Okay. Oh man, Austin was gonna nail this one, isn't he? This is gonna be like his Trubisky or Kenyon Drake. Man, he's been so bad, and of course, no one's going to play him. It is true. His matchup is actually really good. The Texans, that's where you beat the Texans is with receivers. They try to flea flicker to him early in last week's game, like on the first drive, and Josh Allen's pass was just like, way, like not even close to catchable, like landed in the seats. Some fan caught it. But I mean, he's big. He can catch touchdowns, man. I mean, historically he can. Are they going to score points in this game? I mean, they're really, really bad offensively. I mean, but hey, all it takes is one play, dude. So.
Yeah, Kelvin Benjamin, a 30% catch rate so far this year. Not doing a lot with the targets he's gotten, but Houston's defense has been really bad. Their secondary in particular, giving up a 68.5% completion rate, 6.6% passing TD rate, scores on 39% of opponents' drives. I actually do, Alex, I'm with you. I did have a couple of lineups out of the mini max I'm doing this week. I do have that with Josh Allen and Kelvin Benjamin and Zay Jones. I think one of those guys could do something this week. And Josh Allen has sneaky rushing upside, which people forget because, he's like a big, slow, possibly stupid guy. I don't really know. He just seems like he might be a little dumb. No offense, Josh Allen.
He actually is smart. He
is he? Okay.
Yeah, he actually is. And he's definitely not slow. He's not slow.
No, he's a brute. He runs like a man.
Yeah, he's had like a couple of awesome touchdown runs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's something interesting there. Maybe he throws a bomb. Maybe he rushes for a score and gets you 30, 40 rushing yards. I think at his price, it does make sense, and you can run it back with Houston as well. Houston has a ton of options to hit. I'm also a little curious on the Houston side about Lamar Miller coming off a week where he didn't play but was active. Seemed kind of weird. Seems like he wants to be in the game and wants to win back his role. And this has been a Buffalo defense who's okay versus the rush, but does give up some scores. I don't mind him, but I'm with you, Alex. I think this game is interesting. It's just, boy, hard to trust Buffalo and Houston, honestly. Houston's not good. Let's see. What else do we have here on the slate, Alex? Any other games that are jumping out? Actually, let's talk about Minnesota because they tend to be, one game I've totally blown off that we should talk before we talk Minnesota. Pittsburgh and Cincinnati, a traditional AFC North battle, but with two teams who have been more, kind of high octane passing offenses this year. Alex, any interest in this game?
Yeah, I think I definitely have interest on both sides. Pittsburgh has to be one of the best fantasy teams right now because all of their fantasy value is concentrated in like 3 players, Smith, Schuster, Brown, and Connor. So I think any week those guys have a lot of potential. The fact that it's going to be a competitive game kind of bolsters that chance. So I think that this week, based on the salaries, I like the receivers a little bit more than Connor, at least on DraftKings. So I'm definitely looking at that. On the other side, I think Joe Mixon, with Bernard out, he's going to see a lot of volume, and the price isn't. It's pretty high, 7,500, but I think he's still pretty. He's worth it. Evan, what do you think?
Vance McDonald, I think, is interesting because he just burned the field last week. His and his salary hasn't come up. So, he you have to understand what happened in that game, the game script in that game. I mean, the Steelers just kicked their ass, and they were in, it was a James Conner game, and Antonio Brown got 1 million targets, and nobody else got more than 4 targets on the entire Steelers roster. Juju did not get a lot of target. He got 4 targets. So the script of the game was such that, the Steelers were probably going to have to throw a little bit less, and, they could lean on James Conner more. And, only one dude was good in fantasy in the passing game, So I don't think that this game is going to play out like that. I mean, we have the number 3 and the number 4 teams in terms of offensive scoring through 5 weeks. We have the Steelers back on the road, and things could, be a little bumpier, in the passing game for them. Ben has not performed well in these road games at 1 p.m. Eastern time historically. And no one's going to play Vance McDonald, and really his, in terms of his usage, his role. I mean, nothing really was concerning last week about that. I mean, it was, just all a product of the game itself. So I think that he is an interesting kind of cheap tournament pivot, and a fade recency bias pivot.
Yeah, I would agree with you there. I think Antonio Brown, too, being at 8,700, I think is an interesting Julio Jones pivot we talked about before, is going to have a ton of ownership. But Juju, to me, stands out as a guy who should be, due for something this week. It seemed like last week was kind of the feed Antonio Brown to shut him up and show that, hey, we're on the same page. And now we can kind of get back to the usual. And I think Juju, Juju's been really under-targeted the last 2 weeks. And I think now that Antonio Brown has kind of gotten well, I like Juju a lot in this spot, and I think the matchup kind of benefits him well versus Cincinnati. I can see him squeezing into a bunch of open areas with that defense. Terrell Austin, not my favorite defensive coordinator in the league on the other side. And 2, on the Cincinnati side, Joe Mixon is expected to be the highest owned part of the Cincinnati offense. I think after his big game last week, I would have no problem going back to A.J. Green and Tyler Boyd. I think both those guys at home, Tyler Boyd in particular, with Pittsburgh bringing a lot of pressure. He has been Andy Dalton's most targeted player when Dalton's under pressure. And I think Boyd could be in a pretty good get well spot for him as well after being so quiet last week. Everybody forgets about Tyler Boyd, but he's been nasty.
Yeah, I think Boyd, I like, especially on FanDuel. I think his salary is more favorable there. One other guy I forgot to mention is CJ Uzomah, because Tyler Kroft and Tyler Eifert are both out. So I think he's going to get a lot of snaps. So far this year, he hasn't done a lot with them, but Cincinnati has targeted the tight end at a fairly decent clip. So if that transfers over to him and he's 3K, that has a lot of fantasy value.
Yeah, and Pittsburgh has been bad versus tight end as well, according to Football Outsiders DVOA. And then last week we saw that even in a matchup where the Falcons couldn't get going, we saw Austin Hooper get peppered with targets and turn it into a pretty good day. So yeah, I think Uzomah is a pretty good play. Still pretty highly owned this week, surprisingly. Still over 10% owned, even after burning some folks last week. So people love the CJ Uzomah. I don't blame them. How about Minnesota? I like Minnesota always. I feel like Minnesota always is kind of under-owned. They're in a matchup coming back. I guess Dalvin Cook is expected to be back in the lineup. Their point total is pretty high again. I don't know. I feel like people just don't talk about Minnesota enough, so I want to talk about Minnesota. Alex, any thoughts about Minnesota at home against Arizona this week?
Yeah, I think I like the receivers, Thielen and Diggs. They're definitely always in play every single week, and they're not my highest owned wide receivers right now, but I think they have a lot of potential. And then on the other side, I'd run it back with David Johnson. I mean, he's only 5,900, and he's pretty clearly the best offensive player on the Cardinals. So I think if you're hoping that Thielen and Diggs have big games, then David Johnson's going to have to be a big part of the resistance there.
Yeah, and I think David Johnson is in a good spot. Also, his price is down even after being pretty highly owned last week. So I'm with you there. And the Minnesota defense has not been that great. Josh Rosen has been Also not great, but at least shown some flashes, some connection with Christian Kirk too, which I think is interesting. Evan, how do you feel about this Arizona-Minnesota game?
Yeah, the first thing that stands out to me is like the Cardinals are coming off a home win and going on the road to face like a really good team. But also the Vikings are without their starting left tackle, Riley Reef, and that's the side where Chandler Jones plays. And the Cardinals, they really are not a good team, but they have a really good pass rush. They're like top 10 in pretty much every pass rush metric. And, a large portion of that is because of Chandler Jones. And now his personal, matchup becomes enhanced by the Vikings being without their left tackle. So that's it. Like, the Cardinals defense, I think, is like kind of a sneaky option here. But it does concern me about Kirk Cousins individually. Like Steph Diggs and especially Adam Thielen, they can still get theirs. But that's one thing that I note about this game. I really like to play RBs against the Cardinals because their inability to sustain drives offensively allows for the opponent, and just the fact that they're not good allows for the opponents like get a ton of rushing attempts against them. I mean, they have the most rushing attempts against by like almost 30, I think, through 5 games. They've given up, the most 25 yard runs in the NFL. And that's always a great place to attack the Cardinals. But Dalvin Cook is banged up. So I'm not sure where to go there. Like I wish he was, because he was full practice on Thursday, but then he was limited on Friday, and I don't like that little downgrade for a dude that we've already seen have like multiple setbacks with this hamstring injury.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the hamstrings we've seen be an issue for a lot of players so far this year. It's one injury that I'm not super excited to jump back in the water with and expect a ton of volume, because I would be all over Cook this week for the reasons you outlined. I think it's a pretty good matchup for him, but I just don't trust the hamstrings. You could see him just like not play after the second quarter, and it wouldn't be surprising at all. And then you're holding the Dalvin Cook bag. I don't love it. I want to like him a lot. I could see if you're playing 150, a bunch of lineups, throw him in, have one or two of them, but I can't say you could trust Dalvin Cook this week. Let's see what else. Well, people have been asking a lot about John Brown for some reason. I don't really know why. I don't know if there's something I'm missing there, but Evan, how do you feel about this Baltimore-Tennessee game? To me, it seems like it's going to be a defensive clash, which with not a lot to love, but anything we might be missing there?
Oh, yeah, it's gross, man. This is another. I think the whole slate sucks, man, because especially like the main slate, because we don't have that San Francisco, Green Bay game, and we don't have Kansas City, New England, and the Giants Eagles game would have been very interesting to put on this slate. So yeah, there's a lot of grossness here, and the Ravens Titans is absolutely among it. My God, man. I mean, who would you want to play from this? John Brown for sure. You just mentioned him. Maybe Buck Allen. I think that Buck Allen is kind of intriguing against the Titans. The Titans have been bad in run defense, but really what you want from Buck Allen is catches. He's real cheap, and he catch a lot of passes, and they use him. They definitely use him in scoring position. And Alex Collins is just a train wreck, man. Losing fumbles at the goal line last week. I think he's hurt because beat writers were saying that he did not look right in practice last Friday. He was on the injury report with a knee injury, and then he limped off in the second half of the game last week. So I think that and then I think they only have 2 RBs right now on their roster because or that are available, because their number 3 back Delance Turner is out this week, so they might only have 2 RBs in the game, and one of them is I think he's hurt and he's been a train wreck. So that kind of makes Buck Allen interesting here.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to have to get yards somewhere. I think that's also the argument some people have made. I've seen some tout love for Dion Lewis on the Tennessee side. People assuming that's the only way they're going to be able to move the balls with him. I probably won't get there because I think the Baltimore defense is getting better by the week. And it would scare me to go with anybody on Tennessee. But you could talk me into Lewis, and you could maybe talk me into Corey Davis just because he gets enough volume where who knows? I mean, not a great matchup, but a 30% target share. Ugh, ugly. Thoughts on Trubisky? Your boy, Alex, you are the Trubisky whisperer. Apparently, he's thrown 6 TDs with a sleeve on. He's wearing the sleeve again. So obviously, it means he'll definitely throw 6 touchdowns again versus the Dolphins. How are you feeling about Trubisky's prospects going into Miami?
To be honest, I'd love to tell you guys I think he's a great play because, I'm in Chicago, and I think there's a little bit more optimism about Trubisky now after the 6 TD game. But I think the time to play him isn't now. Especially coming off the big performance, I think more recreational players will be on him. I don't have all the numbers in front of me, but I'm guessing the prices of some of the guys like Taylor Gabriel and Trey Burton have gone up since their big games.
Not a ton for Gabriel, a little bit for Burton. Burton's at 4,500. Gabriel still at 4,300.
Okay, yeah. The main thing is I just think they're better plays in other games. So none of these guys are really popping off for me. Evan, what are you thinking about this game?
Yeah, this is another ugly one. Just no one on Miami. No one. It's like it's a rotation at every position. Bears D, but yeah, I mean they're pretty interesting. I thought it was interesting that Ryan Tannehill was added to the injury report on Friday. It's probably nothing, but he's listed as questionable with the shoulder injury. Did he take a hit to his throwing arm? We don't know what happened there, but I took note of that. The Dolphins' offensive line just collapsed last week after their left tackle Laramie Tunsil left with a concussion. Wound up giving up 2 defensive touchdowns to the Bengals. But Tunsil's expected to play. But they put their left guard and their center on injured reserve, so their offensive line is like a legitimate issue. And facing this Bears defense, that's a concern for them. I'll say Tarek Cohen on the Bears is at least someone to talk about, because before the bye in that Tampa Bay game, his usage skyrocketed. He played almost 50% of the snaps. He had 20 touches. And I think that this game kind of sets up well for him because the Dolphins linebackers, you can really attack them in pass coverage. And Tarek Cohen would be a great means for doing that. So yeah, I just those were the things that I'm thinking about for this game.
Tariq Cohen, by the way, just to plug one thing that's out there. He had a very funny video with Bleacher Report this week where he ate Jewish food for the first time. And he called a yarmulke a tiny Jewish fitted cap, which was one of the funniest things I've ever seen a football player say. So I just want to give Tariq Cohen a shout out for being funny in a video. I like the Bears defense a ton here. I think the pressure on Ryan Tannehill has been getting to him a lot. You've seen a downturn in his performance the last couple of weeks. And I also think this Miami offense depends a lot on plays developing downfield in unconventional ways, which the Bears are not going to fall for that at all. And they're going to hurt people on this Miami side. So I love the Bears defense. And I also love Jordan Howard coming back on the Chicago side. It's not a fantastic run defense versus Miami, not a terrible one either. But Howard, they need to get going. And he's still getting a little bit under 19 touches a game. And they got Trubisky going. I think this is the week you try to see them feed Howard where you don't have to put up a ton of points to win in Miami. I like that pairing a lot. And I want to see Howard get going because I like him. He's a good player.
The crazy thing about Howard, though, is for some reason, even though he's had a terrible fantasy season, his price is still really high on DraftKings. It's 6,500 right now. So when you're comparing him to guys like Chris Carson, who's going to get a pretty similar workload, and he's 2K less, it's pretty hard to end up on Howard.
Yeah, I think for me, the positive correlation between the defense and running back probably took me there, but I think you might be right. It might be a little. You might not need to do that this week, but I just want to see Howard get going. He's been good in previous years. People in the chat asking about Jordan Howard game. Gabriel Moreno's asking. I hope so. But let's round it out with our new thing we're doing every week where we got to really make the tough picks at the end. Our contrarian QB pick of the week. Let's start with that. Alex, who would you go as your contrarian QB?
Let me bring up the ownership real quick just so I can make sure my guy is contrarian. But
Jameis Winston.
how did you guess? All right. So this guy isn't like totally off the board. Well, I have two. I guess they're equally owned: Russell Wilson and Deshaun Watson. Both are 5%. I think they're some of my top value quarterbacks. I think when you're looking at quarterback, you gotta take into account the price of the guys they're passing to as well. And I think the team stack's pretty good for both of those teams.
Evan, how about you? Contrarian QB pick.
Yeah, mine has been Keenum in this game that projects as high scoring just based on the totals. And again, the total has not moved down considerably despite the weather. And look, the Rams can put up points on anyone. I mean, they have over 30 points in 5 straight games to begin the year. Jared Goff actually has. This is weird because most quarterbacks have really they have pretty strong home splits. He's been better on the road in his career. So, and again, I think this Denver defense, I think the Denver team shows up this week. Like, they have to show up. It's kind of a situation like the Jets last week. You remember we talked about this. I think this was part of your thinking for the Isaiah Crowell thing, is that, they were like in a really tough spot. We talked about Casey Rogers. We talked about, hey, their coach might get fired. They were coming off a bad road loss, going back home. And this is kind of a similar situation with the Broncos. They've lost 3 straight. One of them, they almost won against the Chiefs. So I mean, their backs are against the wall as a team. It doesn't mean they're suddenly going to be, get everything together and be a good team the rest of the way. But, these dudes are grown men and, they have pride and, I think that they show up as a team this week. And I think that the game does end up being fairly high scoring, and Case Keenum can capitalize on that. And the Rams cornerbacks right now, they're missing Aqib Talib so badly. Sam Shields and Marcus Peters have given up 8 touchdown passes over the last 3 weeks. So, I think that Case Keenum, Case Keenum could get benched, dude. He's been terrible, and so I think that we do see Chad Kelly before the end of the season, but I think that with Case Keenum, he can have a good game here.
Yeah, I think that's a good pick. And it makes sense. A home dog, I think, has always been an interesting, over history, an interesting spot to target for a quarterback. And especially against a team like the Rams who can pull away fast. As long as he stays in the game and doesn't get benched for Chad Kelly, I agree that Case Keenum is a good play. For my pick, I'll go with a guy we didn't talk about today, but Baker Mayfield, I think, has been throwing it enough where I like that. I think the Chargers defense is not as good as it looked last week versus Oakland. They seem like really, really ready for the Raiders. I don't know why that would be, but I think going into Cleveland, a very hungry Cleveland team. Antonio Callaway, a little interesting to me, getting back in the mix with Higgins hurt. I like the matchup. I think it's interesting. And I think for a guy under 5% owned, who is a guy that we haven't mentioned yet, I would go with Baker Mayfield. Contrarian running back, Evan, we'll go to you first.
I'm going back to the Jets, but not Isaiah Crowell this week, because Isaiah Crowell was DNP Wednesday and Thursday, limited on Friday, game time decision, might not play. But even if he does play, Bilal Powell had more touches than him last week. He had 20. Bilal Powell had 20. Isaiah Crowell had 16. Bilal Powell can catch passes. He's got twice as many targets on the season as Crowell. And the Colts, they've really started to fall apart defensively. They've given up over 30 points in back-to-back games. And they've given up a ton of receiving production to running backs. So I think that Bilal Powell can come back and have a good game, whether or not Isaiah Crowell is active. And it seems like the beat writers do expect Isaiah Crowell to be active, but I think that I think that Bilal Powell is going to get more touches and snaps than Isaiah Crowell either way.
Yeah, and the pass game upside too is helpful for him. Could definitely get 5-6 targets and add some value there. I'm with you on that. Alex, how about you? Contrarian running back pick.
It's actually funny. I was going to pick Powell myself. But since Evan already beat me to the punch here, I will go for a super contrarian flyer. with Ronald Jones. I was kind of expecting him to do a little bit more this year. He was inactive for the first 3 weeks. Saw some more action in the blowout versus the Bears last week, but this is more of a pick where I think that they might be sick of Peyton Barber at this point because he, especially in fantasy, I mean, his top for the season was like 7 points. So this would be a pick where you're hoping that they're just gonna give the ball to Jones and see what he can do. So I think the potential there is pretty good for the salary.
I'm gonna go with Peyton Barber as my contrarian running back pick. He was who I had in mind, and he's a little lower owned than Ronald Jones according to our projections by the Bears, the thinnest of margins, but both guys very low owned. Barber's gotten more red zone work. I think he's more of a traditional goal line back, even though he hasn't had a ton of chances to show that or been very good showing that this year. But I'm with you. I think if I were playing lineups, I would make sure to have exposure to both those guys pretty close to even though, because I think either guy can go off and they offer similar kind of profiles in terms of usage. And then, a super high scoring game. I think it makes sense. We're going to go to our contrarian wide receiver pick and our fade of the week. We'll do that too. But first, I just want to make sure everybody like and subscribe to the video. Subscribe to the channel, rather, like the video. Promo code Contrary will get you 1 week free on Osmo.com for all of our ownership projections and rankings. And also, we have a deal going on right now for NBA where if you use promo code DROP1, you get a half month off of an NBA package. NBA season starting up on Tuesday. We have a ton of great people on staff. Fast Eddie Fear, myself, Josh, Alex will be contributing content. Unfortunately, Evan not helping us out with basketball, not pulling his weight. But we are going to have a ton of people doing stuff. So go sign up 1.5 month free with a promo code DROP1 for NBA. Go do that. And also stay tuned into this channel when we jump off. We're going to have a new trivia show premiering with Fast Eddie Fear and Evan and Alex. You'll be getting a chance to win Alex's money, or at least one person every week will. So keep an eye peeled for that. Trivia show, doing some weird shit. How you feeling about that, Alex? You going to win?
Man, I feel like I might be easy money on this one, but we'll see.
No, I'm going to get killed. I'm worried about this.
You're going to make Evan look bad. We sell him as such a savant. Both you guys, if you guys don't do well here, you're going to let everybody down. So, no pressure, guys.
This video has a high potential of being removed from the internet after we stream it.
Well, the important thing is you try. That's all we ask for here. Let's go contrarian wide receiver real fast, and then we'll do our fade of the week. Alex, go first. Contrarian wide receiver pick.
I'll go with the tight end this week. I like Nick Vannett. As I mentioned, Will Dissly is out. Vannett saw 5 targets in weeks 2 and 3 when Dissly was playing, I think. And since then, he hasn't seen as many targets, but I think the potential for him to run more routes is there. So I'm hoping that Russell Wilson gets more than 13 completions this week and Vannett gets in the end zone.
Evan, how about you?
Are people on Jordan Reed?
Let's see. I would assume not after last week, especially. But
right. And that was, an island game. Like, people were watching. Like, where's Jordan Reed?
Yeah, 3% Jordan Reed expected.
Oh wow. So like the receiver core is incredibly banged up for the Redskins. I mean, it seemed like every Paul Richardson, Jamison Crowder, Josh Doxson, Chris Thompson, they are all listed as questionable. So, I mean, that's a lot of targets there, man, and I mean, some of them are going to play, but, some of them probably aren't. And so that frees up some opportunity. This is another situation where like the Redskins just got embarrassed on the road. I mean, that was an embarrassing game. That was a pathetic performance. We know that Alex Smith isn't particularly good, but I mean, he's not that bad. Like so now they're going home, and if you look at just Jordan Reed's like routes run and his snaps, they were normally in line with what he usually gets, and he was good in the first 3 games. He didn't have like huge games, but he was pretty good. And the Panthers. They have not like necessarily given up like big games to tight ends, but teams that have been targeting them in the passing game have been highly efficient when targeting tight ends against them. I think that there are a lot of arrows here pointing at a significant bounce back game here for the Redskins offense, but Jordan Reed in particular. And if no one's going to play, one of the best receiving tight ends in the league, like that's a pretty good opportunity for us.
Yep, I would agree there. I'm going to take my contrarian wide receiver from the Jets. Again, one more Jets pick to be contrarian. Quincy Enunwa, I think I'm a little worried about his hip. He didn't look fantastic last week, but another week of healing. I think, it seems natural to me to kind of pivot to him after Robbie Anderson's coming off of a big week where we're still not projecting a ton of ownership, so it's not a leverage play. But Enunwa has been the most popular target by far, going against an Indianapolis defense who's given up a ton of yards and a 72% completion rate to opposing QBs. I just like the matchup for Enunwa. And I also don't mind running it back with Chester Rogers or Zach Pascal as pivots to Eric Ebron. I think there's going to be some points in this game, so I'm intrigued by it. Evan, chalk fade of the week. People loved that everybody, we were all against Vance McDonald last week. The people want that again. Let's close it out with your chalk fade of the week.
Come back to me.
Okay. Alex, you're up first. No pressure.
Well, this one has a high potential of backfiring, I feel like. But
I like that already.
I'll just go with Jameis Winston because he's in a good spot this week, but I'm not sure he's worthy of his 20% ownership. With 24 different quarterbacks to choose from, 1 out of 5 people being on Jameis Winston seems a little bit ridiculous. So I might be trying to be a little bit sneakier there.
Okay, I like that. You got one, Evan? You ready?
Yeah, I mean, what even is the chalk? It's just such a gross slate. Like, what is the chalk?
The QBs in the Atlanta-Tampa Bay game, right. Chris Carson, Julio, Yeldon, Gurley, maybe.
I'll definitely go Yeldon. And as the week progressed, I really started to like the Cowboys defense in this game. Another situation where they lost in prime time, and they have a home game following it up, and they're facing this Jacksonville team that the Jaguars lost their left tackle Cam Robinson to a torn ACL in, I believe, week 2, and they have been using Josh Wells at left tackle, and they had to place him on injured reserve with a groin injury. So, they're down to their 3rd string left tackle, and they're facing this Cowboys defense that is really good in terms of pass defense. Like, they have a bunch of sacks. I mean, they're top 5 in the NFL in sacks. They're getting back David Irving from suspension. David Irving is a great interior pass rusher. They're not getting Sean Lee back. I thought that they might because he practiced a little bit this week, but they're not getting him back. But now they're facing this Jacksonville team that, Bortles threw 4 picks last week. I mean, he's got a ton of turnovers this season. He's been taken he's taken 10 sacks over the last 3 games. Then they have to put more on his plate, or at least they feel like they have to, because when they don't have Leonard Fournette, and that can be good in fantasy sometimes. Hey, last week, you could play Bortles and the Chiefs defense in the same lineup, and you were like, that's like the nuts. I mean, the dude he was like the quarterback 4 on the week, and the Chiefs defense was awesome. I don't like Bortles as much this week individually, but I do like the idea of playing the Cowboys defense against him. They should be the chalk at defense, I would think. But yeah, I mean, TJ Yeldon, I think he's a solid player, but I think that he's not going to have a big game here.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Dallas' defense is always a little bit under-recognized, and in past years they've been terrible. But this year I think it deserved. They had a pretty good showing. Watson still had a decent game, but they've shown well when given the opportunity. For me, I'm actually going to fade Zeke in that same game. I think that's just going to be an ugly matchup on both sides. And again, I'm a Dallas fan, but it's hard to root for them this year, and they can't get anything going through the air. And I think Jacksonville, even though they haven't been great on the ground this year, there's nothing else to stop in the pass game. So I would not play Zeke, even though he's super cheap. He's getting a ton of ownership, and it's not the spot this week. But that's it for me, guys. Any parting words, Evan or Alex?
Yeah, just thanks everyone for watching. Evan, it's always a pleasure discussing our contrarian takes. Hopefully we'll get some more little clips for everyone for next week to kind of pimp.
Hopefully be right about something one more time.
I'm really excited about the NBA season starting Tuesday. As Chris mentioned, we have a special promo going on for the next week where you can use coupon code DROP1, get half off the first month of NBA. And we're going to be having some shows starting tomorrow. That will be really exciting. So that'll be really cool because NFL is the nuts on Sunday, and I like the showdown slates. But NBA is really awesome to have the remainder of the week.
Yep. It is a fun sport to be a part of here at Osmo, and we've had a lot of success thus far this preseason with both Eddie's picks and on our own. So make sure to tune in for NBA stuff. Promo code DROP1, as Alex mentioned, 1.5 month free of NBA. And that's it. Make sure to throw us a like, subscribe to the channel, please. So you can see all of our content, including what's coming up next, the trivia show in which both Evan and Alex will be on, competing for money with one of the viewers / listeners / subscribers out there. So it'll be a lot of fun, hosted by Fast Eddie Fear. Keep your eyes peeled there. It'll be coming up soon. And we'll be back tomorrow with more live streams before lock and all of that. Keep tuned in the morning, and lots of good information will be coming up. So thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you again soon.